Well, good Monday evening, WNBA and LA Sparks fans, and welcome into the LA Sparks 365 Network, your 24/7 365 comprehensive home of the WNBA and your two-time WNBA champion Los Angeles Sparks. And welcome in, everybody, to the flagship show of the network, folks, that is called Sparks 365, covering anything and everything involving the LA Sparks and the WNBA, alongside Chris Mancy at the Inner Studios up in Anaheim, California. Cal McClure joining you folks here from Studio 171 in San Diego. Chris, good evening, man. It's been a long Monday evening. How's it been going, man?
Nothing much. I'm just hanging here.
Good to hear, man. So, Chris, we got a lot of ground to cover tonight, and of course, Chris, we go into our full court press for our last show coming up at 10:30, which will be Sparks Fam for roughly 10 to 20 minutes, perhaps, depending on time that we have left. But, Chris, there's a lot to get to. Some good news, some bad news, more blame, and a bunch of other stuff to get to, man. But other than that, man, I know you caught part of what was the big event in the WNBA tonight, Chris, with involving the 5 WNBA players on The Bachelorette tonight on ABC, man. For anyone that may have missed it or saw part of it, man, what you saw, how did that game go between the guys and the 5 WNBA players?
The WNBA just took the guys to school.
Oh, it's very good to hear. So again, folks, if you didn't catch it, catch some highlights on either ABC.com or tomorrow morning on Access Hollywood. But Chris, we have some good news, some bad news, and some more blame to give here, Chris. But we'll get to our opening tip-off headlines, man, which is the good news, Chris. We have gotten word from a few people on Twitter that Kristi Toliver, Chris, will return to the Sparks for the upcoming 3 games, which will include the 3 big games, Chris, that they needed her the most, which will include Atlanta tomorrow, Chicago on Friday, and, of course, Chris, the Minnesota Lynx on Sunday. But then, Chris, she's here for 3, and then back on the road back to Slovakia again next week. But, Chris, partially, man, in my view, this is sort of a inhale, exhale moment, Chris, because you have your big puzzle piece coming back, Chris, for probably, Chris, the 3 most crucial games on your schedule so far in the season, man. When you probably, man, saw the tweet combos between Shorty, myself, Trinisha Hardy, and a few other people, Chris, about KT coming back, your initial reaction was ... what?
Just awesome. A little bit that KT will be back 3 games. Crucial 3 games against Atlanta, Chicago, and the top dog, Minnesota. So just great. She's back for 3 games that we need her, but just that's it. Because why going overseas when it's not until 2 years?
Well, Chris, we're going to get to that in our next topic here about, again, about the blame game here, man. But in my view, man, though, this, in my view, holds off the SOS, or the distress signal for the Sparks fans and the team, Chris, that now Toliver's back for 3. But, Chris, it's not only 3 games, it's the 3 most critical games you have on the schedule right here and now. When you need her the most, Chris, and you got her when you need her the most, Chris, which is against Atlanta, Chris, who's reeling and struggling as much as LA has. Chicago, who's right now, Chris, still owning the Eastern Conference. They'll be the number 1 seed over there again. And, of course, Chris, when you need her the most against the Minnesota Lynx on Sunday. But, again, Chris, again, man, this isn't the time here where we start throwing up the distress signals. This isn't, the Titanic movie with James Cameron and Leonardo DiCaprio and everyone else in that great movie from '97, man, where they're throwing up the flares and the, SOS, save our souls, Chris, because there's no need to right now with these 3 games here that you have. Okay, we know that it's a bit of a uphill climb for the first 2, Chris, and it's the Mount Everest climb on Sunday. So, Chris, now that you have Toliver back in the mix, at least for 3, Chris, but looking at it right now, man, is you're going to have KT for the 3 most important games on the schedule so far. I'm not saying that there's Chris, that the rest of the schedule is irrelevant later in the year, but right now, at this point in time, when you're 2-2, you're struggling, you're having some injury problems, Chris, some depth problems, and you get Toliver back for these 3 games after her little tryout, Chris. So, again, you got Atlanta tomorrow. You've got Chicago Friday. And then, of course, we should come home to play Minnesota. But again, Chris, we know that we kind of were a bit flustered and a bit panicky last night because about if she would come back with the 3 games here. But Chris, again, there is some light at the end of this tunnel, Chris. Okay, you come off those 3 games. You got some time off, Chris. Then Friday, Saturday, you've got Tulsa on the road. You got the Stars on the road. Then you got Minnesota back at home. So, Chris, there's 2 games out of that little mix here in the coming few weeks where you have a chance to pick up 2 easy W's, perhaps. I'm not going to really say it's a easy win because we saw what Tulsa did last year at Staples Center where it went to double overtime, and the Stars really aren't a walkover at home. But Chris, again, man, I'm not, Chris, I'm not going like this. I'm not going like this to the schedule, throwing it aside about later in the year, man. But these are the 3 most crucial games on your schedule right now that you have to pick up a W in, or if you're going to lose by a respectable margin, triple overtime, 6 overtimes, or lose by 1 at the buzzer, Chris. But knowing that you have Tolliver back in place, there is a little bit of a, and we can hold off on the SOS signals and the fireworks and the flares and the distress signals, Chris, about our sinking ship. But with Tolliver back, Chris, we can kind of ease off on panic mode here, man. But again, knowing, Chris, that Tolliver's coming back, does that make the team a bit more at ease, knowing that Tolliver's coming back for at least 3 games coming up here in the coming 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think it gives the team, knowing she'll be back for 3 games, it'll ease them up and be confident that they could at least try to win these 3 games, or at least take 2 out of 3.
Chris, I mean, again, man, looking at these 3 games, I mean, these are really big uphill mountain climbs, Chris. We're talking the Mount Kilimanjaro ones Tuesday and Friday. But, Chris, you faced the Mount Everest one on Sunday, and that is Minnesota, Chris, who, again, is coming in riding 7 straight wins. Probably, Chris, could be 8 or 9 or 0 when you play them on Sunday. And someone has got to put a stop to that train sometime soon. Otherwise, it's going to be running away all the way unbeaten the whole season, perhaps. You never know, man. But looking at it, though, again, the 3 games are back, and then you've got her gone next week. But, Chris, I think it's more important that you have Tolliver for the first 3 rather than maybe the games in Tulsa or San Antonio, because you know, Chris, that Tulsa is a punching bag. They don't have really any key players. Skylar Diggins maybe, yes, but it's still, though, Chris, there's not a whole lot of firepower on that Shock team. And I think, Chris, even without KT, the Sparks could at least beat and win those 2 road games in Tulsa and San Antonio. But again, Chris, knowing that Tolliver's coming back for the 3 most critical games right now, man, on the schedule, I mean, how big of a role does her presence tomorrow, Friday, and Sunday play for the Sparks these upcoming 3 games, knowing that KT is back for a week at least before she goes back overseas?
I think she's going to play a big role, knowing she's back for 3 games. I think she's going to have a big role on the Sparks.
Quick shout out to our viewer out there. If you're interested in asking some questions, click on the black box and ask us a question right here. Where you guys, you can click on the black box right there and join our live Q&A for the viewer out there watching us. Go ahead and do so if you want to. All right, Chris, going to shift gears here and go back to the topic that basically made us boil over last night, which is still putting the blame here for the mishandled situation, Chris. But right now, man, I'm not going to say my piece about last night. But, Chris, I'm going to actually throw some blame here towards the Sparks head of communications and media, Chris, for not writing an article about an injured player and about Candace and about KT, Chris, not being gone, when they decided, Chris, to write about an article about the Bachelorette, Chris. I mean, I'm way over my head with frustration about Chris, of just how these little things that we fans and media members, Chris, need to know about, of just how they're going and being swept under the rug, Chris. So let's go to the first topic here, man, which, again, is just about what has occurred with how the Sparks have Chris, mishandled this entire saga with Tolliver leaving yesterday for Slovakia. So, Chris, we'll go there first, man. And we know, man, that this is going to be a talking point for a few days. More so, Chris, maybe for the whole week. because of how this has been mishandled here, man. But again, man, your stance, your thoughts here, man, and let it out of you, man. I mean, you can be frustrated, you can be pissed off and angry, man, like I'm going to be pretty soon. But let it out of you, man. I mean, you know, in your mind, how much blame does the Sparks front office get for this bonehead move right now that they have made?
Just a pathetic move by the Sparks front office, but not writing an article situation on this, just like the off season on 34 days about what's going on. They just don't even talk about, just like today, just talk about the Bachelorette, not even talking about the players getting injured or their player getting overseas, not talking about just something about Bachelorette, not even to deal with.
Chris, I disagree with your one point about the offseason. Everyone got fired, in case you forgot, so no one can update the fans on the situation in case you forgot about that, man. So I disagree with you on that side of the story. But, Chris, I agree, though, man, 100% that this is a ridiculous, pathetic, and poorly planned and poorly timed time to do this. Again, man, realizing and looking at the big picture here, Chris, the Sparks knowing that the Lynx right now are going to get the #1 seed, Chris, and right now with this move, man, they basically handed Minnesota the Western Conference title, in my view, already as well, with this sort of move here, because they're not even, Chris, giving it a try to get back into the #2 seed and at least have home court advantage if they play Phoenix again or Seattle in the postseason this year, if and when they get there, Chris. But Chris, now I'm going from putting all the blame on Penny Toller, Chris, to being half and half now, Chris, of blaming the Sparks front office now. And now, Chris, blaming the Sparks head of communications and media relations here of how they have also mishandled the situation, Chris, of not even telling the fans that Tolliver is going to be gone for X amount of days. Chris, I mean, it's had to come, Chris, from one of our favorite people out there, Chris, Sue Favor of Hoopism on Twitter, who's broke the news to us, Chris. So there is miscommunication, Chris. There's discombobulation, and there's a lot of, Chris, just a lot of unprofessionalism going on in that Sparks front office right now, Chris, that's, you know, at 111 South Figueroa Boulevard, Chris, up there in L.A., because there's no one out there, Chris, that is basically telling the fans, and above all, Chris, the media, about what's occurring here. Chris, if it's coming from Sue Favor or Albert Lee about what's occurring with the Sparks, man, not from our own local LA media like ESPN LA 710 or Ramona Shelburne, Chris, or someone with the knowledge of the situations from the Sparks like Coach Miller or Chris McGee, Chris, there's a major problem, Chris. And now I'm shifting from having all the blame on one cent Toller, Chris, to now it's both ways. Toller, you're getting one half, and the Sparks communication front office, Chris, and everyone else in the communication, the media, Chris, they're also getting blamed here because they have really, Chris, both sides of the story, Chris. It's a two-way street, Chris, and they both have screwed up this issue here very, very badly.
Yep, agreed. Then they don't even communication or nothing.
I mean, Chris, here's a good example for you, man, which is our next topic here, Chris, is I was on my way to my baseball game today, folks, which I was working my first baseball game for my new job on the radio today, which was actually online, via online video. But Chris, I was in my car, you know, looking through Twitter, Chris, and again, man, this is why half the blame goes to the Sparks media department, Chris, because Sue Favor of Hoopism, Chris, was the only person that broke the news, Chris, which is the bad news, Chris, and that is a update, Chris, on Candace Wiggins. It's far worse, Chris, than a swollen knee, Chris. She had meniscus surgery on her knee, Chris. She is out 4 to 6 weeks, pending review of how long she rehabs, Chris. So looking at this right now, I'm not good with math, Chris. You know that very well, that I struggle very bad with numbers, Chris. But at least looking at the situation, I'm going to go open up my calendar on my phone, Chris, see how long 4 to 6 weeks, Chris, roughly is here. I'm not good with telling time as far as weeks go, folks, but at least looking at the calendar right now, Chris, the 4 to 6 week time frame at this point in time looks like, Chris, I've counted 6 weeks, and that will be the week, Chris, of July 7th, when Wiggins could possibly come back from his injury. Now, the 4 weeks, Chris, would end Chris, at the end of this month. Would be 4 weeks. So you're looking, Chris, at having ice out towards the stretch run of a season, Chris, which is July. Chris, why is it the stretch run of a season, man? Because, again, the FIBA World Championship Tournament going on in Turkey this upcoming in September and October, Chris. Again, a condensed WNBA schedule. So, again, that's why there's not a long season going into September, early October like normal. But, Chris, right now, though, I think, Chris, two things. Good for Candace, Chris, to take the initiative, Chris, of having the surgery done today, Chris, to have her knee healthy. But two, Chris, needing her the most, Chris, down the stretch. When you need to win games and you need to lock up your playoff berth, Chris, that is your perfect time, Chris, to bring back Candace Wiggins, Chris, when she comes back from her rehab in the 6-week time frame, Chris, is in July. When you are in the final full month of the season and you got to get some wins and you got to lock up your postseason berth, Chris, that is when you bring back Candace Wiggins, Chris. But again, hey, it was swollen. They held the route, Chris, to see what was wrong with it, but now we know the facts. It was way worse than a swollen, banged-up, bruised knee, Chris. It was a meniscus issue, so hey, you take the 4 to 6 weeks off, Chris, and you come back, and you will be needed in that month of July and early August, Chris. So again, we know that Wiggins is out, man. We'll talk about the other roster spot opening, perhaps, involving Megan Simmons later on in the show, Chris. But, Chris, knowing now that Ice is out for this time frame, Chris, your thoughts about her taking the initiative to get her knee looked at and have a surgery done, Chris? And also, is she needed, Chris, more so now or more so when it really counts in July and late August, in early August?
It's really good. Candace Wiggins could have the surgery now so she doesn't strain him even more, and where she's out for the whole season. Do it now, and we need her down the stretch. We need the wins right during the playoff run, and yeah.
Chris, I'm going to give a little round of applause here, Chris, to someone on Twitter. That would be Chris Rashad Jackson. He got class for taking the time, Chris, to saying that he wishes Candace Wiggins, Chris, a very speedy recovery, and that Candace is his sister in Christ, as they're both real big religious people. But, Chris, again, class act move, Chris, by another one of our great WNBA fans out there, which is why we're the #1 sports league out there, folks, because we don't kill people or stab somebody because of who they root for, Chris. But, again, Chris, very class move by Rashad Jackson. Again, Chris, who's been one of our favorite people out there, Chris, even though he's a Lynx fan. We got mad love and mad respect for him, Chris, because he's been very good lately out there. But, Chris, again, you know, as much, man, as it hurts to not see Ice on the floor, man, again, you know, you got to give her the props, Chris, again, for not, you know, beating around the dead horse or around the bush that it was just a swollen knee, Chris, saying, look, I got something way worse. Let me off with the surgery and let me come back when I'm healthy and back at it. But, again, Chris, looking at it, okay, 4 to 6 weeks, man, is late June or the second week of July that Ice can return. And, again, man, that is more so where the Sparks need her the most, Chris, because if they rattle off, Chris, if they rattle off 3 wins here, if they beat the 3 teams that they need to beat this upcoming week, man, and they're rolling down the stretch, man, and they get her back in time for the playoffs, they're looking pretty to possibly get out of the first round and possibly, Chris, lock up with the Lynx in the Western Conference Finals this year, man. But again, man, a bit bummed not to see Ice on June 22nd if and when we go to the game, man, but again, at least, Chris, she took the initiative here, man, and I could tell by her tweet, though, because she tweeted about Derrick Rose today, man, so I knew that she either went back home down here to San Diego, Chris, either get the knee looked at or possibly get surgery, Chris. So, again, a lot of respect, though, Chris, for Rashad Jackson for at least telling her to get well. And, of course, Chris, we will say it here as well because she's on the team, but, again, we wish nothing better, Chris, than a nice, lengthy, speedy recovery to Candace Wiggins, Chris, to come back healthy when we will need her the most down the stretch run.
Yep.
All right, Chris, we're going to move on now to our game day topics here, Chris. And before we get to the game, man, we will talk about the man himself, Chris, in case people forgot out there. The man that did it, folks, with the Sparks in 2001 and 2002, Showtime himself, Chris. Michael Cooper will coach his first game, Chris, against his former club, the LA Sparks, tomorrow in Atlanta at 4 o'clock on ESPN2, Chris. Chris, before we get to the game, let's talk about Coach Cooper, man, because he is a legend in Los Angeles, California, Chris. A Pasadena City College graduate, Chris. Went on to UNM and played for the Lakers, his hometown team, winning the 5 titles with Magic and Kareem in the Showtime era back in those days. And of course, Chris, we know him well. At least, Chris, I remember him well. I don't know if you were watching the league back in 01 or 02, Chris, but of course, when Coop still had hair, 2001, Chris, the Sparks beat Charlotte. And Chris, my favorite year, the best year, Chris, that the Sparks had, 2002. Nikki Teasley, Chris, at the buzzer, her only shot of the game, flushes the 3 to beat New York to win the championship in 02, Chris. And, Chris, I mean, as much as we want LA to win tomorrow, man, it's win-win for Sparks fans, Chris, because Michael Cooper, man, has meant so much to the Sparks organization, Chris. For the longest time, man, he's had two different stints with the Sparks, 01, 02, those years, Chris. He came back to coach during Parker's rookie season from 08 to 2011. And, Chris, I mean, above all, from the Sparks, man, of course, he's loved by everyone out there. From the fam on Twitter, Chris, for him being, one of the best NBA defensive player of all time, Chris. Chris, before we get to the game, man, again, there's like nothing else, man, that we can say about Coach Cooper, but he is by far, man, he is a legend, Chris, not only with the Lakers, Chris, but he is also a legend with the Sparks, man, bringing the Sparks their first 2 titles in 01 and 02. And, Chris, he left the Sparks for a few years, man, but he had the heart. His heart was aching, Chris, and he came back here to coach again when Candace Parker came into the league in 08, Chris. So, laid out there, man, about Coach Cooper and his success with the Sparks, man, as we now have 2 people viewing us now here on the show. So, let's hear about it, man. Let's talk about no one better, Chris, than Showtime himself, Michael freaking Cooper, man.
Just awesome coach, coaching the Sparks, Michael Cooper, and just can't wait to see him tomorrow on the sideline, coaching against his former club, the Sparks.
Chris, in your mind, how weird is it going to be for Coop to look across the floor and see the purple and gold again on the sidelines, Chris, knowing Chris, that he led this franchise from, Chris, being in the shadow of the legendary Houston Comets, Chris, from 97, 98, 99, and 2000, Chris, 4 straight years, the Sparks succumbed and fell to Houston in the postseason, Chris, until 2001, when they finally got over the hump and beat Houston. They took down Utah and then beat Charlotte in the 01 finals, Chris. And then in 02, man, they get past Seattle and they get through Utah one more time, or I think it may have been Seattle and Sacramento, I think, Chris. And then at the buzzer to beat New York in 2002, man. I mean, in your mind, Chris, I mean, how weird will it be, Chris, when Coop sees the Sparks on the court at the opening tip-off, man, knowing the legacy, Chris, he left behind back here in Los Angeles, Chris, not only on the Sparks, but, of course, Chris, on the Lakers?
He's probably going to seem weird that seeing the Sparks and he's coaching against them and not even be helping the other team. He's going to be beating LA, not helping LA win this time.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, Chris, that for all those years, Chris, that Coop would receive the beat LA chance, but now he's going to be giving up the beat LA chance tomorrow night, Chris. But, Chris, let's sort of fast forward a bit to August 5th, when the Dream come to Staples Center, Chris, to play the Sparks in Los Angeles, man. Now, we know about what occurred last season when Delisha Milton-Jones came back with the Stars to play Los Angeles, Chris, how she got the regular visitors treatment, Chris, the regular booze and the USUP chants and everything like that, Chris, knowing, though, that DMJ was part of the first 2 teams, man. Chris, are you at all a bit concerned, though, that the Sparks fans might give Coach Cooper the same sort of run for his money, even though he's not coaching the Dream or the Lynx, but he's not coaching Phoenix or some rival of the Sparks, but he's coaching Atlanta? But, Chris, in my view, though, I think the fans would be smart enough, Chris, and they better be smart enough, or I'm going to be pissed off on that show when I do the show, Chris, from Hawaii on August 5th, when I'm over in Hawaii on vacation covering the Sparks, though, still, man. I'm going to be pissed, Chris, if there's going to be booze and regular visitors treatment, Chris, towards Coach Cooper that day, Chris. I'm going to be pissed. I'm going to be coming out here, Chris, and ranting and raving and throwing the entire family on Twitter under the bus if that happens.
Yep, agree, because Cooper led your Sparks, our Sparks, to 2 championships, 2 only championships, and now since he's not coaching, he ain't coaching Phoenix, he ain't coaching Minnesota, and you got to throw him under the bus and give him the silent treatment.
If that happens, folks, expect a very pissed off Cal McClure from his hotel room, folks, in Honolulu, Hawaii, on August 5th when we do the recap show here, folks. But, Chris, getting to one of our final buzzer topics here, Chris, is our game preview, Chris. Sparks are in Atlanta, Georgia tomorrow, Chris. They'll take on the Atlanta Dream, the defending Eastern Conference champions, tomorrow at 4 o'clock, Chris. It's on ESPN2. I'm going to be watching part of it, Chris, before I go to my radio show tomorrow night at 6 on Mountain Country 107.9 FM, Chris. But, Chris, there's a bit of a small little window of opportunity involving the Sparks, possibly, Chris, winning tomorrow, and that is one Angel McCoughtry, Chris. We talked about it last night, but a bit of a oddball injury, Chris, involving her shoulder blades. Some bumps and bruises, Chris, that she's had. Reoccurring injury, Chris, since her overseas time in Turkey, Chris. Chris, Atlanta comes in here, man, in a odd position. They are currently tied for 3rd with Indiana, Chris, and they are at 3-3. Sparks are 2-2. They're in 3rd place as well in the Western Conference, Chris. And, Chris, the reason why, Chris, I say there's a small little window of opportunity open, Chris, is because either 2 things. Angel has not played in the past few games, or she's been off because of the injury, Chris. So there's a small little chance, perhaps, LA's got a chance to win tomorrow, man. But again, man, they've got to come out and do a few things, Chris, and that is abide by the petition law for one. You didn't do it on Sunday. You didn't even get close enough to it. You didn't even sniff it on Sunday. Some better defense, Chris. Now, I know that we can't really blame the game on the missed free throw by Parker with 11.5 to play, or about the insane Globetrotters three-pointer that Ivy Lotta, Chris, just basically hooked up there and it went in. But again, Chris, some better defense in some certain situations is one thing. And, of course, Chris, stay healthy. Limit your turnovers too, Chris. And, hey, like you did last night, man, own the paint and you should win. And, of course, abide by the damn petition law, Chris. But in your mind, first, though, man, your thoughts about Angel McCoughtry, because she's been a player, Chris, that's been a dynamic force and has been, Chris, through 2 weeks, I guess, apparently in the top 10 for running for the, I guess, the MVP apparently already for the league after 2 weeks of the season. But, Chris, knowing that Angel's a bit beat up, okay, either not playing in a few games or not scoring her normal points because of what they're calling, Chris, is something involving her shoulder blades, Chris, is there a little window opening, or is the door in my studio, Chris, a bit cracked open for LA to possibly walk through and beat Atlanta tomorrow night, Chris? Your thoughts about tomorrow's game?
I think LA has a little small chance of beating Atlanta if McCoughtry doesn't play, or if she does play, but she still has that injury and she's not on her game. LA has a chance of beating Atlanta, and it won't be probably a little close game.
Chris, it's probably gonna be close. I mean, I don't think LA has the firepower right now, Chris, knowing that Ice Wiggins is out for a while, Chris, to do what the Sun did yesterday, Chris, and that's basically take the Dream out of woodshed and beat the holy hell out of it like they did last night at the Mohegan Sun Arena, Chris. But in my view, though, man, knowing that McCoughtry's either been out of the lineup, Chris, or off her game, you have to be, Chris, like a shark that smells blood in the water, Chris. You have to attack and take advantage of this golden gift you are receiving. If McCoughtry is out tomorrow, or she plays and doesn't do so hot, man, you have to be a shark you have to be like a shark, Chris, that smells blood in the water, Chris. And you have to come out there, man, and you have to attack and beat down Atlanta when you have your golden chance. Chris, in my view, it's going to have to come down to a game, as we now have 3 people watching us here, folks. Thank you guys for tuning in here tonight on the Sparks Network. But, Chris, in my view, though, man, you have got to come out, man, and you have to be on fire. I mean, it's going to have to be, Chris, a game. Chris, you cannot afford to have a start like you did against Phoenix at home on your home opener, and that is go ice cold to start the game and then pick up towards the end, Chris. You have to be like you did against San Antonio at home 2 weeks ago, Chris, and that's come out and at least hit your first 5 shots. I mean, if you don't do that, you're really in trouble, Chris, and above all, score 20 each quarter, and please abide by our law. Otherwise, you guys are not winning the game tomorrow night. But again, Chris, knowing there is a small little opening for LA, which would be, of course, without McCautry possibly either playing or off for game man. I mean, I think LA wins if they play some defense, if they can play some defense, and basically, Chris, just play defense. All I'm going to say is just play some tough defense here in the game. Make your free throws when they count the most, man, and own the paint. And above all, I mean, looking at the steal apartment, Chris, I mean, our Minty Harrington, Chris, is going to have a big game tomorrow playing. And above all, Chris, I think as well, Chris, my picks right now for four on the floor, Chris, are my normal 2, which would be Candace and NECA, Chris. I'm going with Lindsey Harding and Minty Harrington, Chris. Reason being, this is their first game together back in Atlanta, where they had played in previous seasons, Chris. So I think they have a break. I think those two both have breakout games, Chris, in front of their former fans, and they stick it to Atlanta, Chris. So I think those two are going to be the turning point factors for tomorrow, Chris. So I think LH10 and Minty Fresh are going to be my picks for 4 on the floor, Chris, because it's their first game back in Atlanta together, and hey, they would love to beat their former team tomorrow night on their home floor.
Yep, agree. Lindsey Harding and Minty Harrington are going to be forced to reckon with tomorrow.
There's extra motivation there, Chris, other than what Candace normally tweets out on game day. There's extra motivation for Minty and Lindsey to beat their former team. Chris, I know we're going a bit long here. Remember, we're going to go into a little bit of some soccer stoppage time status here. We're going a bit past 10:30 here, but Chris, real quick. Now we know about Chris, Candace Wiggins being out for an extended period of time, Chris. So that brings me back, Chris, to our ongoing hashtag thing on Twitter, Chris, which is the hashtag of Megan Simmons to LA, Chris. Now, we have had some social interaction via Tanisha Hardy, Chris, our 365 correspondent here, Chris, courtesy of Instagram involving annotated 110 on Twitter and Instagram, Chris, involving that Megan Simmons, Chris, is still training after she has been cut by New York. She's back practicing, Chris, and training and working out, Chris. So is Megan Simmons, Chris, possibly, Chris, wanting to come where she should have come on draft day, which would have been to L.A. at the 11th spot had L.A. not traded their number 11 pick, Chris, to Connecticut for Sandrine Gruder, Chris. But knowing, Chris, that there has been some talk between Tanisha Hardy, Chris, one of our Spark 365 correspondents here, and Megan Simmons on Instagram, Chris, is there a small little chance, though, knowing that Megan Simmons, Chris, said that we will see about her coming to L.A., and she's hoping, Chris, she said, hopefully I'll see you there. Is there a small chance, Chris, that we will see Megan Simmons in a Sparks uniform in the coming few days?
I think so, since she's replying to Tanisha Harding on Instagram, saying she's working out, she's training, and replying, we will see. And I think she's saying, we'll see you there.
Chris, in my view, I mean, I feel terrible for Megan Simmons. I mean, I know that she's one of my favorite players, Chris, being from Tennessee. Yay. You know, go Rocky Top and stuff like that, man. Me being a big Tennessee women's basketball fan, Chris. But, you know, I was heartbroken for her that she got cut, Chris, when she didn't even play a single damn game, Chris. But knowing that guy that we know best, Chris, we don't even need to say his name, Chris, because we already know what he's done in Detroit in 1988, and also as well, you know, with the shock in 08 and other things included, Chris. We know about what this guy's done in the past. I mean, Chris, I've been really sad, Chris, very depressed, Chris, and very heartbroken about the treatment that Megan Simmons has received, Chris, over the past week, man, that she didn't even get a chance in hell to play with New York, Chris. She didn't even play a single regular season game, Chris. Yeah, she played the preseason game, Chris, but, Chris, she didn't play one single regular season affair with New York, Chris. So, Chris, knowing now at the Sparks, Chris, if Penny Tor, Chris, is smart enough up here where the brain's at, upstairs, Chris, to realize that you let KT walk away for a few weeks, and now that Wiggins has hurt Chris for 6 weeks, isn't this the time you make a move, Chris, and you bring in Megan Simmons, who is a guard and can fill the void for either Wiggins and or for Tolliver, Chris?
I think so, yeah, since I think it was Tanisha Harding said, since we don't need Nikki Green, since we have Hampton, who's going to be back next season, since she's playing, I think, still in college, I think, yeah, volleyball, I think that's what we said before, off season. We'll have her back next season, so we don't need Nikki Green. We could just cut her and then bring in Megan Simmons.
Chris, Jennifer Hampson will be back next season. She had 1 year of eligibility left, Chris, to play volleyball at BYU. She's taken the year off, Chris, to basically play her last year, Chris, of volleyball, and then she'll be back with LA next season, Chris. So again, we'll work on that at a later time and date. But also, man, I mean, Chris, had LA not have made the move for Gruda, Chris, the mock drafts had Simmons, Chris, going to LA at number 11. So like Shorty Mama 24, Chris, said earlier today on Twitter, to me at least, that it was meant to happen, that New York would draft her, Chris, and that Gabi No, best be loved to hate his guts, would cut her, and Chris, she would find her way back home to Los Angeles, I think, man. So, Chris, obviously, if I'm the one that's done the hashtag, if I'm the one that started the hashtag of Megan Simmons to LA, Chris, come on now. I mean, the way it's looking, man, if she's talking to Sparks fans out there, something's telling you up here, man, that LA's on her mind and she wants to be in Los Angeles sometime soon.
Yep.
But, folks, we've gone 6 minutes over the – well, now 7 minutes over the cliff here, folks. We're going to be going into a full court press mode. But, folks, real quick, a milestone here, folks. We have hit our new single show high record for most views, folks. We've had 3 people view us tonight, so we're very thankful for you folks tuning in to watch us here. So that's a new record, Chris, for us on the live show here, man. So, hey, good to see that we got some people watching, man, and we thank you all for watching us tonight.
Yep.
So the bar, Chris, has been set at 3. So now we got to get over 3 or more now, Chris, on our next few shows down the week. Chris, we'll take our only time out, folks, when we come back. Full court press, folks. A very short edition of Sparks Fam is up next here, folks. So for those viewers out there that are watching us, don't go anywhere, folks. We're going to take a brief break here at Miss Hangout. When we come back, we're going to be going to our interactive, free-flowing, open social media form so you guys can send us tweets, IG photos, or live Q&A here, guys. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more after this. So if you guys are watching, we'll be right back, so don't flip out. So be sure to rejoin us here in about, give us maybe a few minutes here, folks. But again, we will come back in a few. But again, thank you again to our 3 viewers out there. We'll take a break here, folks. This is the LA Sparks 3 65 here, folks. So don't go away with social media right after this break.